the excuse that continues to be given for this war, and we're just going to run through this quickly before we get to Lev, is that the reason this war is necessary is Russia. And Russia continues to be the all-purpose villain that Western elites now use whenever they get caught in any sort of scandal, any kind of failure, they immediately point to Russia. They say, it's not our fault, look over there at the Kremlin. So we have several amazing examples just from this week to show you how prevalent this tactic continues to be, how central this narrative is to all kinds of American propaganda. So here is Prime Minister Trudeau sort of apologizing for participating in this standing ovation for a member of the Nazi SS. We have pictures of this person in his Nazi SS uniform during World War II fighting for the German Nazis. And earlier this week, President Trudeau was looking at him and standing and applauding along with the rest of the Canadian Parliament and President Zelensky. President Zelensky has yet to speak about this incident. Like, hey, I'm sorry that I led your country to stand and applaud a Ukrainian Nazi, because in Ukraine it's a very common event. And he seems unwilling, Zelensky does, to be able to criticize Ukrainian Nazis since they constitute such an important part of his fighting base. But in Canada, the politics are a little bit different. Jewish groups are infuriated, as you might imagine. And here is Justin Trudeau apologizing, sort of.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened. The speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and, by extension, to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are celebrating commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
How did he go from apologizing profusely for having stood and honored a Nazi soldier to leaping to how important it is that we not allow Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation to grow? What did one have to do with the other? They just instinctively point to Moscow anytime they get caught in any sort of embarrassment or any sort of failure. Here was Hillary Clinton. Remember her? She's the pioneer of this tactic. She had a whole list of people she wanted to blame for her 2016 defeat, everyone besides herself and the people she paid to win the election, and settled eventually on Putin in Moscow. Here she is with former White House press secretary Jen Psaki, now essentially doing the same job, but for MSNBC. And they were talking about the 2024 election, and you'll never guess what Hillary Clinton decided to babble about as well.
Vladimir Putin has obviously your friend and mine.
Yes, indeed.
He has intervened in our election in the past.
Right.
It's not something, as you experienced firsthand, it's not something we talk about a lot. Do you fear that that is something that could be happening for 2024? And do you think we should be talking about it more?
Well, I think we should be talking about it more, because I don't think, despite all of the deniers, there's any doubt that he interfered in our election, or that he has interfered in many ways in the internal affairs of other countries, funding political parties, funding, political candidates, buying off, government officials in different places.
I mean, they're still talking about Russian interference, and they're never going to stop because it serves its purpose. Everything she just accused Putin of having done, funding oppositional parties, funding candidates, is something the United States State Department did in Russia under Hillary Clinton. It's all public knowledge. You can go on the National Endowment of Democracy website and find the financing by the State Department of Russian opposition groups, of Russian candidates. We interfere in every country in exactly those ways. But again, pointing to Russia as the reason to explain everything is their go-to instinct. Here, amazingly, on Fox News, now that they have Tucker Carlson, the most important dissident on the war in Ukraine, off the air, they presented Trey Gowdy, the former congressman from South Carolina, talking about how he cannot understand how anybody could be opposed to Biden's war policy in Ukraine. And then listen to what they had the national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin who's notorious for reading Pentagon press releases as truth, listen to what her explanation is for how somebody might be questioning Biden's Ukraine war policy. This is Fox News in the post-Tucker era.
Lawyer, I do try to understand the other side. I do not understand the hostility toward Ukraine. Belittling Zelensky, calling it Ukraine's war against Russia. Have I missed something?
Trey, I think the only way to understand that is that Russian disinformation has been able to mold some aspects of the information flow into our country as well as into some European countries. They've been...
All right, there you have it. I can't understand, said Trey Gowdy, how anybody could possibly be opposed to President Biden and the EU's obsession with this war in Ukraine. And Jennifer Griffin said the only explanation, the only way anybody might be opposed to it or might question it, even though it's the majority of Americans now doing so, is that we're all victims of Russian disinformation. The vast majority of the world has stayed out of this war. Apparently, we're all just victims of Russian disinformation, the excuse for everything. Just to give you one final example before we talk to Lev, we had Richie Medhurst on a couple of weeks ago talking about the situation in Niger and the coup in Niger and how the government, the new government, has demanded that France leave Niger, saying you have no more permission to remain on our soil. And they had protests outside of the French embassy and the French military installation every day from angry people in Niger demanding that France finally leave. And even though Emmanuel Macron vowed that he would never leave until the prior government asked him to, they reversed course in this very humiliating way, and they decided, you know what, I guess we have to leave. And he called back the French ambassador and the French troops, and they're all leaving Niger. And the Economist went to explain why it is that people in Niger are tired of French colonialism and want the French gone from their country. And here's what they had to say in explaining that. There you see the headline, why Emmanuel Macron is pulling French troops out of Niger. France's decision to quit leaves its African policy in disarray. And this is the explanation, quote, yet the French decision to quit Niger is about much more than this. It is partly a pragmatic recognition that the junta was not going to budge and that regional countries, despite their threats, were unlikely to try to dislodge it from power. The decision also marks a reluctant and painful realization in Paris that its influence on the continent has taken a severe knock. In the eyes of a generation of younger Nigerians, and partly thanks to the efficiency of Russian disinformation campaigns, France is now regarded as the problem, not the solution. Yet again, it's Russian disinformation that has caused the people of Niger not to be grateful any longer for France exploiting their country, but instead it's that dastardly Russian disinformation that's to blame for everything, that is the excuse for everything from why the French got expelled, to the failures of the Democratic Party, to why people are turning against the war in Ukraine, to the fact that Justin Trudeau stood up and applauded a neo-Nazi in the Canadian Parliament. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.